There we
Greetings,
go.
mortals, and a capital day to you all. It's a beautiful day, full of opportunity. Today, I'm joined by the current grandmaster of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ in the Temple of Solomon, more commonly known as the Knights Templar. Frother, feel free to introduce yourself. The checkered floor is yours.
All right. Well, I'm Timothy Hogan, and as you said correctly, I'm current grandmaster of one of the Templar lineages, the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, and I run the Templar Collegia uh, uh, along with it, and I'm involved in a lot of other Templar lineages as well. So great to be
So he
here with
has
you today.
great to have you here. He has experience. So I'll just get right into. I have a bunch of questions been meaning to ask you. So I'll just go into the first thing. Uh, uh, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days when the sons of God came in onto the daughters of men, and they bore giants to them. I've never heard you talk about giants, so
Well, I mean, there's the giants metaphorically, and I think there were physical giants in antiquity. I mean, they found the skeletons of people over 8 feet tall all over the Americas in particular, but they've also found them in China and other places as well. And in fact, if you go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you can find coffins, that are some of them are as much as 12 feet tall. For individuals that we don't have the mummies now. We don't know what happened to them, but we still find the coffins for them. So yeah, I think there were giants in antiquity for sure. And in fact, even President Thomas Jefferson had American President Thomas Jefferson had sent out a group of people specifically to look for remnants of giants around North America. So yeah, there's something to that.
and aren't there wall reliefs in Egypt as well with giant people like they're like tall as like palms.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Egypt. You find that in Egypt. You find that in Sumer. The ancient Native American cultures, indigenous cultures, they talk about having fought with giants that were very tall. Um, on the some of the Egyptian temple, actually like funerary uh, uh, tombs. They have depicted in them the different races and types of people around the world, and included in it is also giants. So yeah, there's something to it.
Yeah, there's that definitely something to it. The New International Version, I think the Bible translation is called. They call them men of renown, heroes of old.
Yeah, yeah,
Heroes. That
yeah.
word I took notice to. Sometimes it's translated as mighty men. Other times it's heroes. So what kind of relationship were they? Were they all bad? Because you do hear a lot of stories of man eating giants and
Yeah, sure. Well, even I mean, they say even Noah came out of the Nephilim as well. So he would have been one of the sons of the Nephilim, and so I mean, I it's hard to say. I mean, of course, Goliath was also depicted as a giant, and of course, David fought Goliath. And there's also talks about the early Hebrews in the New Testament fighting and even committing genocide against these giants. I mean, I'm in a funny position because my last name is Hogan, and Hogan means son of Og, and
ah.
Og was the giants of the race of giants in the Bible. Og Magog were part of the race of giants. So uh, so family lineage, arguably, could be tied to that. And of course, we're tall people, so the Hogans are tall people. So we have, you know, we average 6'4", which is tall compared to people in general, but certainly, if you go back 100 years, when people were much shorter even than they are today, uh, my family would have been very tall back in the day. So I think there's something to it, but I don't think they're all evil or bad or anything. I mean, there's just territorial disputes that have taken place throughout history, and we see it today, and we shouldn't expect it to be any different. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So,
People are gonna be people, no matter the size.
that's
So,
exactly
so
right.
do you also sleep on a 13-foot bed?
I do not, but it's funny. You can another example of the tall, uh, giant-sized people includes, King Arthur was said to be buried at Glastonbury, and the tomb for Arthur at Glastonbury was for someone who was almost 8 feet tall. So, when we look at ancient depictions, it's kind of on the one hand, there's the symbolic representation, right, where it was not uncommon, particularly during the Middle Ages, for royalty and people who are in charge to be depicted as really tall, and the rest of the people shorter. But that was like a symbolic presentation of it. But on the other hand, and we might find that as well in the ancient world, where the important people are or gods or whatever you want to call them, are being depicted as tall, relative to the common people. But it could be that there's really something to that too. I mean, in terms of their heights. Another example is in Mexico. They have the Mayan burial of Lord Pakal, and Pakal is depicted as being this very tall person, going on almost 8 feet, when you consider the population at the time from average people was only about 4.5 feet. So he would have been a giant, no doubt.
Yeah, because a lot of people seem to get really hung up on like the Book of Enoch, where they're described as being very malevolent and the
Sure.
sons of fallen angels. But when we read scripture, like just read Genesis, it doesn't clearly say which side mated with. And when I think back to Gilgamesh, I mean, he started out as a cruel, tyrannical ruler. But then the gods sent Enkidu to come show him what's what, and then he had this redemption arc, and he became a hero.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and it's hard to know for sure, right? But I would assume that as long as they're working on behalf of humanity, they're considered good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if they're fighting humanity for resources or something, then of course they're made out to be bad. I mean, that's just what people do.
History is written by the victors, as they say.
That's right.
It'd be really interesting I was talking with my last interview. I was talking with Phoenix Aurelius. He's a great alchemist.
Yeah.
And And he said it would be super interesting to know what kind of stuff they know, the giants. If you talk, because there are reportings of modern day giants being seen. Like what kind of magic tricks, what kind of what perspective of history would they have?
Well, if you remember, like Tubal-Cain, for example, of the Bible, I mean, he would have been of that line, and of course, he was deemed with being the inventor of metallic operations by fire. So, which would be alchemy.
Oh.
So it would suggest that, there was definitely an alchemical tradition being preserved and passed down by them, and even Paracelsus, the great alchemist Paracelsus, he gives special attention to Tubal-Cain, for example, as being part of that tradition. So
awesome.
yeah.
So, I mean, the way I see it, as above, so below, like the gods are they're archetypes inside of us, but we can also see them a representation of something that holds their frequency out there as the planets.
Sure.
But if giants were real, then the Egyptians spoke of a time called Septepi, where gods walked with men.
Yeah.
So that makes me think, what's your perspective on the gods?
Well, there's an entire king's list that you can find at the Temple of Seti the First at Abydos on the walls, and it has listed all the different pharaohs throughout the Egyptian civilization. But at the earliest time, at the Zep-Tepi, as you talk about, they describe a period of about 30,000 years that are just ruled by different gods that are ruling Egypt during that time. And yeah, I mean, they whether they be gods or extraterrestrial beings or beings, maybe from another civilization that were larger or of greater abilities. All of these, we have to be open to all of these as a possibility, because the Egyptians, even though they referred to their gods, their Nibiru, as they could be depicted as different things. They could be depicted as planets. They could be depicted as forces of nature. In fact, the word nature comes from Nibiru, which was the Egyptian word for gods. So it can be all these things. It's just the question of the context of how it's being depicted in the text. But I think there were probably definitely
some ancient aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beings of some kind, of tall stature. At least that's how they're depicted.
Let us make man in our image.
Yeah, that's right.
According to our likeness. Yeah.
Yeah.
That word Elohim is tricky.
Yeah, Elohim. Yeah. It's plural for gods. Both masculine and feminine. So it's definitely interesting. Well, then if you look at some have questioned, if you go to the Serapeum in Egypt, they have these giant sarcophaguses that weigh about 70 tons that were found deep down 200 feet below the surface of the surface. And when the Egyptians found them, and they did find them, they didn't create them, they found them, they thought for sure these sarcophaguses must be the sarcophaguses of the gods, because they were so huge. Now, since then, there have been archaeologists have looked at them and considered them, they could have been used for all kinds of other things. the in my opinion, the most basic being they were actually made to be sarcophaguses for giant bulls, but I don't necessarily believe that. I think they were definitely used for something else, whether it be storage or perhaps they were sarcophaguses for giant beings, but we haven't found the bodies, so it's hard to say.
No, I think somebody makes sure we don't.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely true. That's definitely true.
The what's amazing about those boxes as well, I mean, just the cutting is amazing, but they have like maybe a 2 feet, width to move inside the tunnels. So
right.
how not doing that with slaves.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, and even the ancient Egyptians, when they found it, they went to great pains to try to preserve them, and not only preserve them, but people thought they had some sort of magical powers. I mean, you can even see, if you go down there, you can see areas of the walls where they've scooped out some of the dirt from the sides of the walls because they thought it must be magical, so they would scoop it out and eat it. The Egyptians did, because they didn't know what it was. They just knew it was something beyond their capability. So
yeah, that gets us into talking about this creature feature today, because there's a lot of creature questions.
Nice.
How about that big hairy man in the woods they call Sasquatch?
Oh, Sasquatch. I've been chased by a Sasquatch before. Believe it or not, I don't talk about it too often, but there's an area here in Colorado that is well known for Sasquatch sightings over the last 100 years. And about 20 years ago, my cousin and I decided to go on a night hike into this area, and we actually got chased by a Sasquatch down the mountain for about, I mean, it's a good 2 miles we got chased, and it was making this horrible screeching sound the whole time it was chasing us, and it smelled really bad. And the whole time I was being chased, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening. Like, my rational mind couldn't, and there was one part of me that just wanted to stop and try to communicate with the thing, but it was very clear it was not trying to communicate with us. It was definitely trying to chase us out of the area for one reason or another. So
territory, I guess.
Yeah, so I believe in them. I don't know exactly what they are. I don't know if they're some part of the genetic tree of humanity that got left behind somewhere back there, like a Neanderthal or something, or if it's a different species like a Gigantopithecus, or from maybe an antiquity that just didn't go extinct like we thought it did. Some people say that they're interdimensional beings or something of that nature. I don't know about that. I don't know how you would prove that one way or another. But I just know that I've seen them and I've experienced them here in Colorado. So I definitely believe them.
There's some theories that, when you hear the story about the Anunnaki using a primitive hominid on the planet to mix, that it was Bigfoot, that they mixed our DNA.
Yeah, maybe. Could be.
I mean, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, speculation, really.
Yeah, I just know the people have seen families of them here in Colorado. There was, in fact, recently there was a footage of, there were some people on a train actually that were going through the mountains on a train, and they saw one of these Sasquatch out their window, and they actually got video footage of it, and it was all over the news here in Colorado. But it's it's a pretty common sightings here in Colorado. So I
Yeah,
don't
and
know what they are, but I've seen enough footage, and I've seen in person, had enough experience in person to believe in for sure.
yeah, just millions of people can't be lying. There's so many reports, hundreds of years. I mean, back to the Native Americans even.
Yeah, that's right.
So it seems implausible that everybody would just be making it up. I mean, some
Yeah,
people they don't say anything for like 30 years because
right.
people are gonna make fun of them.
Yeah, what I do know is they seem to be, um, they have families. They travel with their families. I mean, I think just based on some of what I've seen, that they probably eat deer in the forest, amongst other things. I mean, we had in one of the areas that I'm talking about where I've seen them before. They've even hung deer legs over trails and stuff, almost like a way to mark their territory. And they also communicate sometimes with tree knocking, like you see in if you ever watch any of those shows on them. I mean, they do that. They knock. They'll hit a tree to and make a knocking sound sometimes to communicate. And I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But I don't have all the answers for that at all. I don't even have, all I have is my experience.
And the amazing thing is that they some stories they grow to be like 15 feet, like
Right.
way
That's
past.
true.
So how does a 15-foot creature hide in the woods?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I don't know. Yeah, the one that chased me was probably only about 8 or 9 feet, but that was still really tall.
That's plenty
And
big.
yeah, I thought for sure. I didn't know what was going to happen if it caught me. I don't know. I just kept running and with my cousin, and we eventually made it to our car, and we just like drove out of there. So
I think if it wanted to catch you, it would have.
yeah, I think so too. I think so too. I had always hoped. I mean, I go back up into that area all the time, hoping to run into it again, but I haven't had any run-ins since. So
It's not on demand.
yeah, that's right.
But there's an interesting cryptid up in Michigan. You heard of
Mm.
the Michigan Dogman?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what that's about either. I don't know if that's just a Sasquatch that's being miscategorized, or if it's actually like some sort of a werewolf, or or just a dog man, man with a unusual, could be, person. There is that genetic condition where some people get hair that grows all over their face. Maybe it's something like that. I mean, it's hard to know.
It's I've listened to I guess thousands of stories because I'm really interested in the topic. It's just crazy that stuff being out there, and
Yeah,
they're definitely not Sasquatch. They're definitely not people. They're definitely something, some kind of creature because they walk on
yeah,
all fours. Uh, Dogman does or Bigfoot doesn't do that,
yeah,
and and one thing that's everybody always describes like 99% of the time they're amber eyes. It's like somebody described it as sunlight shining through a glass of whiskey, that kind of
oh wow,
color.
wow, wow.
And when everybody who hasn't even heard these stories reports that, you're like, there's something to it.
Yeah,
Everybody can't be lying.
yeah, I'm sure there is something to it. Yeah, there's I think there's a lot more out there, um, than we give credit to sometimes, and it could be that there are beings that are maybe from another dimension potentially, that slips into ours, or even from another point of space time, a different parallel universe or something, that can slip in here at times. I mean, I've had enough weird experiences that I'm open to a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, they're even studying it now at Skinwalker Ranch, and there are a lot of stories at Skinwalker Ranch of portals opening up and
Yeah.
things stepping out of them. So that would be my theory as to how they can hide, because they enter portals and come out of them stuff.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it's got to be something like that.
So another theory is that at least in the case of Dogman, because they look like werewolves, that they're skinwalkers.
Right.
What do you know about skinwalkers, and do you think that's possible to shift into an animal?
Well,
That's
again,
crazy.
we do. They're recorded as being all over the place on Western Colorado, where I live, and I have had friends who've had experiences with, they believed, with skinwalkers on their ranch, and yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything like that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, there are stranger things, and
Yeah,
it could be too. It's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of UFO activity or UAP activity in the area as well, and you never know. It could be weird testing or manipulation, genetic manipulation of animals on behalf of those UAPs, or it could also be some sort of almost like oh, I don't know, like a remote body type of, that was genetically created, that the consciousness of something else could go into. It's hard to know. It's hard, it's really hard to know. But I do know
yep,
there's enough sightings and experiences that people have had that there's something to it.
yeah, definitely. I think I can't don't fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure like there's some kind of laws in like national parks that the park rangers get, or like the general public even, that hunting Bigfoot is illegal.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah, why would they put that? I mean, it's supposed to be serious stuff. They don't make jokes in those.
Right,
So,
right.
so that's interesting. But from Skinwalkers, that leads us into magic, of course.
Yeah,
We've all seen Uri Geller bending spoons there. So
sure.
could you go into more? I like that kind of more, instead of ritual magic. I'm thinking more like telekinesis, maybe light a fire with your hands. That
Yeah,
kind of
well,
stuff.
I will say I do believe that there are mental powers that can shape our reality. I mean, just from a scientific standpoint, we know that from the double split experiment with light photons, that things tend to go where we expect them to go. Uh, there was also, as far as light goes, but there's been all kinds of experiments over the centuries suggesting that our thoughts affect our reality, our experience of reality for sure, but physically affects the building blocks of matter. I mean, I'm an alchemist as well, and I can tell you from an alchemical standpoint, there are certain experiments that you could have two people doing the same experiment, and the alchemist is going to get a different result than the person who's just an average everyday scientist. And it really has to do with the visualization ahead of time of what you're anticipating the outcome to be. and that tends to affect how it actually manifests, which is magic, right? I mean, you're thinking
Yeah.
it beforehand, and then you're manifesting it. So, yeah, I think there's something to that. Of course, there's always that I don't know who said it, but they basically said any form of science that's not sufficiently understood uh, could appear as magic to
Ye-
people who don't know it. You know,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
yeah,
Uh, there, there's the laws of nature that science studies. Then there are the hermetic laws of
right,
nature. So,
exactly, exactly.
and it's
Yeah, and
interesting that there's a freedom of information or declassified CIA document where they actually studied this, and it showed that like intention, like the way you think mentally,
yeah,
like
right.
projects into the future or whatever, and then it slowly realizes like back to you, like it's manifestation pretty much, but
Yeah, that's
from the
right.
CIA.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's something to it. Well, and then of course, there's been all those experiments with water too. You know, where you put intention onto the water and then you freeze it, and things that are chaotic end up showing up as chaotic fractals. Of the water once it's frozen, whereas you know thoughts of healing and harmony and love end up producing harmonious crystals from when it's frozen. And there's a lot of things to that. It's suggesting that water has memory, but again, it's we are programming it with our intentions. And let me give you another example of this that I really like, and I don't think is talked about enough. But it has to do with early in the 20th century when scientists were starting to study subatomic particles. They they found that whatever subatomic particle they could conceive of, they actually found evidence of. And so they created what was called a particle zoo, because there were so many hundreds of subatomic particles that they were finding proof of based on because they were looking for it. So that what they did then is they decided that you can't create a working scientist or a working science out of this. I mean, everything they could conceive of, it seemed like, was manifesting out of the quantum field. So what they had to do was narrow down their definition of a particle in order to create a working science to study it, which means that our entire science right now could be just a subset of a much bigger universe of particles and everything else than scientists are willing to acknowledge at this time. But it all goes back to whatever they could visualize. That's what they found coming out of the quantum field. So it really does suggest that our thoughts have a impact on uh, what's manifesting out of that quantum field. And of course, in more ancient times, that quantum field was just referred to as the ether, right?
Yeah,
So
just
it's
gonna say
really
that.
really the same thing, just a new definition of it. So yeah,
And scientists do like cutting corners to fit their theory. Like the speed of light, they noticed it kept changing, kept like they kept getting different values. So eventually, they just back in the late 1900s, they just
yeah,
like let's define what the speed of light is.
right. That's very true. Yeah. Well, and when you consider even the fact that if we accept the fact that the universe is expanding, which there's some debates about that, whether it is or not, but but if it's expanding, if you have something going the so-called speed of light, from one point to another, if it's doing that within the medium that's expanding, technically it could go faster than the speed of light, the set speed of light. So just by the very nature of the medium that it's within. So, they don't talk about that so much, but I think it's interesting about light. Sir Isaac Newton said the changing of body, the changing of light into bodies and bodies into light is very comfortable in the course of nature, which seems to delighteth in transmutation. And but he was suggesting that actually physical things are just the condensation of light itself, which is kind of an interesting concept to think about. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, if my hand were working at a different frequency than matter, I would just go straight through.
That's true. Yeah.
So when we're talking about the ether, I've heard synchronicity described as like etheric grooves you like enter. What's your idea of synchronicity? It's
I think,
ever-present reality for all those who have eyes to see.
yeah, I think I believe we live in a consciousness field, right? That it's all mind stuff that we're operating in, and it's all consciousness consciously becoming more conscious. And so it is constantly seeking out ways to connect to come to greater levels of awakening. And I think that's what synchronicity is. I mean, it's validation of is bringing the things together that need to come together to bring about greater awareness in any given situation. And because that's all the universe is trying to do all the time. It's just constantly trying to become more aware and more awake. And I think we are just a part of that process.
A fractal within a fractal.
A fractal within a fractal, yeah.
A drop of the ocean that contains the whole ocean.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the Hermetic laws, some people would like to claim that the Kybalion is not a Hermetic text, that it wasn't sourced from. What's your idea of the Kybalion?
Kybalion it really is more of a Neoplatonist text. So it's a Neoplatonic text, is what I would call it, with some. But I mean, it is based off of certain Hermetic principles, like as above, so below, and those principles can be found in the Corpus Hermeticum, as well as on the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. But it's interesting. The Kybalion, it doesn't really quote from the Corpus Hermeticum at all. It just takes the certain principles that seem to be suggested in the Corpus Hermeticum and then making them and then laying them out. But there's such a close, it's so closely related to Neoplatonic thought that that's why most people say, well, this is more of a Neoplatonic text than it is a Hermetic text. In my mind, it depends on what you classify as Hermetic. Some people classify Hermetic thought more with having to do with the creation of talismans and bringing down the forces of the heavens onto talismans here on Earth, for to bring about operations of one kind or another. And I would say, yeah, that's certainly part of it, but it's still going off of those Hermetic principles. So I love the Kabbalion as a text personally. I could see why it could arguably be considered more Neoplatonic than Hermetic, though. But that's okay with me. It's still great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very compact. It's a 90-page book or something. Like from what I understand, it's supposed to be like it comes like some kind of initiates. I mean, it's called the Three Initiates. The author,
Right.
that it comes from like Hermetic sayings and like lost Hermetic texts. It's not from the Corpus Hermeticum at all. I mean, they say there was like 36,000 Hermetic, texts in, like, was it Egypt or recently?
Yeah.
I don't know. Some say
Yeah.
even 300,000. So a lot of them are
Well,
lost.
a lot of them are lost, but you also find Hermetic texts, ironically, within the Nag Hammadi library of Egypt. Where they found these vases, and they found texts within them. Most of them are apocryphal texts of the Bible, but they also found Hermetic texts in with them as well.
Oh, they
which is
did in the
interesting.
Nag Hammadi?
Yeah, Nag Hammadi, yeah. So it suggests that the people that were valuing those texts, the biblical texts, were also valuing the Hermetic texts. So and they saw them as compatible with each other.
Either way, they were valuing the Good Shepherd.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Whether you're talking Hermes or Jesus.
Yeah. Exactly. So have you ever heard of star forts?
Star forts?
Yeah, star forts.
No,
Let me see if I can if I pull it up here. Star forts. Bastion fort, they're called, I guess. Let me see the oldest one in America, because it was built in like the 1500s or something.
Oh, so you're saying they're forts aligned with the stars?
I'm gonna show you a star fort. I will see if we exit full screen, and I can share my screen, right? Slides, share screen.
I mean, any ancient temple, any temple in the ancient world was aligned with the stars. I mean, that's where the word temple comes from. It comes from the word for time in Latin, and so it was really, and we measured time by the fixed stars of the zodiac. So hence why it was called a temple to begin with, because it could be used to measure time based on the stars.
Here you have an example. Yeah, they're pulsed. Yeah. You see how they look like somatic, like almost like snowflakes,
Right,
and
right.
And the thing is, the earliest star fort in America, it was before the 1600s, and it's like millions of blocks. How did people carry that during, like, and it was in the West, like Wild West, back then, the frontier.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna build a million block star fort up here, and some people say the Knights Templar built them. That's why I was asking.
Well, there are similar structures to that can be found even in the Amazon, actually, but going back 12,000 years. So not even recent, but like ancient. They're uncovering them in the rainforest right now as they've been burning down trees to create farmland and such in the Amazon. They've discovered these same structures that seem to be aligned with different star constellations, and also the solstices and the equinoxes. And you find that all over the place, but it's hard to it's not unique. I mean, all temples are aligned with star constellations, and hence why they're called a temple, because templum means time, and it has to do with the how star constellations are aligned, and how you track those that's what gives us time. So templum has a double meaning of both, being like a temple of worship, but it's also a place that's aligned with the stars. So those forts are really just temples.
Yeah, it does look like it.
Yeah.
Like speaking about my previous guest, Phoenix Aurelius, he explained to me just from a scientific level how astrology works, and it's that like every planet, every star, every heavenly body sends out light, and that's a frequency, which that affects you.
Yeah,
And that's just the most scientific way of looking at astrology.
for sure.
And
I
we
think
feel
that's
different when the
probably,
sun is up.
yeah, I think there's probably something to the fact too that, when you're born at certain times of the year, there are different physical conditions in the environment during that time of the year. I mean, if you're born at a time where it's really snowy out, for example, and cold, and you're having to be bundled up really tightly to keep you warm as a baby, that being your introduction to the world is going to be very different than a baby that's born in a hot climate, where you don't need to even have any clothes on, in order to be cool. So I think those conditions do affect us as we come into the world.
Yeah.
If you're born in a time where you're having to have a lot of clothes on to keep you warm because it's cold out, that might tend to impress upon your consciousness, even from at the age of a baby, that you need more things around you to keep you alive, which may in turn make you more materialistic, as you grow up. So I think while there's energies that come from star systems and planets and things of that nature, I think there's also just it acts as a giant clock, which the zodiac acts as a clock, which helps define different months of the year present different conditions in our physical environment, which absolutely can impress upon us even as a baby, as we grow up, from when we enter into this world.
Oh yeah, I believe it. So how do you say it from the Illusion Mysteries? Kakion? Kakion? The drink? You heard of it, right?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. From the Eleusinian Mysteries. Yeah.
From the yeah.
Sure.
So do you have any? Because I know Amork claims to their traditions go back all the way to the Illusion Mysteries.
Yeah. I don't
So do you
think
have any?
they don't provide any
evidence. Yeah.
psychedelic drinks, though. I've been through all the Denmark temple degrees, which are great, but they don't provide any psychedelic drinks for you to have or anything like that. So. But
Wow.
yeah, I mean, there was, I think all over the ancient world, within the mystery traditions, they would concoct something that would be psychedelic in nature, um, so that your perspective of the world changed, and the intention behind it was to say, look, you think your world is so stable and unchanging, but then once you take this, it gives you a totally different perspective of things. And so what does that mean? Who are you really, and how changeable is our perception and our consciousness and everything else? And I think that was definitely one of the first stages, is coming to know thyself, right? And know what are your thoughts, and how are they generated, and how do our perspectives change um, under different circumstances. So
Yeah, I think it was Dennis McKenna who said that the only reason drugs work is because we're made of drugs.
right,
The chemicals that interact with each other. Isn't there
yeah,
a
for sure.
church in America that has the license to is it ayahuasca or like shrooms? I don't know.
Ayahuasca church. Yeah, sure. There's
Yeah,
ayahuasca church.
yeah.
And there's some native traditions that, of course, use peyote for a similar thing. Uh, all these things have DMT in them, or dimethyltryptamine, which is really what causes the hallucinogenic properties, especially when taken with an inhibitor like Syrian rue or something like that, which allows the hallucinogenic properties to become more active. And yeah,
DMT is interesting because they haven't proven that it's generated in the brain, but in the spinal fluid we have DMT, and you as a Mason would probably think the
yeah,
spine is pretty important.
yeah, for
33
sure,
degrees of the spine.
for sure. There's it is interesting within Masonic tradition. One of the plants that's emphasized is the acacia, and there are certain forms of acacia which are really rich in DMT. And if you were to prepare them alchemically, that's what you would get. If you were to do the extractions on that acacia, what you'd get out of it would be DMT, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and even in Egypt, they worship the blue lotus, which is
Yeah,
a
blue lotus, which is an
mild
aphrodisiac.
mild psychedelic
Uh,
as well.
yeah, and they had that, and also they'd work with that in acacia as well, and also uh, a few other plants in the area, but they all had these different properties to them for sure.
You don't often think about psychedelics and such when you think about us as Westerners having a tradition. But for instance, the Vikings, they eat Amanita muscaria, I think. Well, it's
That's
origin,
right.
but probably, yeah,
That's
to
right.
enter a
Well, and they also
trance
made
state.
honey mead. They make mead out of honey, and which has its own properties to it. And
Yeah, and
yeah,
the Scythians, who were the ancestors of the Vikings, I would be willing to bet. They would set up a teepee and then throw cannabis on the smoke, on the flames, and view the smoke.
Yeah, supposedly that's what they say. I mean,
Yeah.
there's lots of there's so many different types of psychotropic plants and herbs and mushrooms and or fungi out there. I mean, it's just a question of being able to track it down. I mean, they say even the story of the reindeer, associated with Santa Claus is really tied into that whole process as well, because you could in some of the Nordic countries and in Mongolia as well, they're known for the reindeer will eat the psychotropic mushrooms at a particular time of year, and then if you drink the urine of the reindeer, you would have these
It removes the toxins.
Right, psychedelic experiences. So yeah, humanity has from the earliest times been using drugs like this as a baptism by earth to change your perspective of your reality. So then you begin to question, well, okay, if this is changeable, what is it really that I'm living in? And this, of course, leads to the Gnostic path, right? Which involves through your own efforts, attempting to have these experiences with this greater consciousness or this greater manifestation of consciousness in the universe, which was called the Christos in Gnostic texts. But it was usually something that when texts would refer to making Christ our husband, for example, it was talking about the wedding chamber of Sophia, representing the individual soul uniting with that universal consciousness, and that's where gnosis comes into being, or divine experiential knowledge.
I do wonder because I have this theory that it says in the Bible that Jesus is the exact likeness of God. Maybe it's pretty much, and you have in Kabbalah, I think it's Michael who's related to Mercury, right? In Kabbalah, some traditions, and the closest planet to the sun, which Kepler thought was the father, is of course Mercury. So, and Sophia is often associated with Venus, and you have the hermaphrodite, Hermes and Mercury,
right?
Aphrodite.
Right.
It's not the thing. I don't know. I just came up with it.
Yeah, no, those symbolic representations are there for a reason, for sure. And Hermeticism is really a form of Gnosticism. It's just it was a pagan form of Gnosticism. So
they both use the term gnosis,
right?
So both are Gnostics by definition.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So here's something I'm willing to bet you nobody's ever asked you in an interview.
Okay.
What do you know about the free gardeners?
The free gardeners?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a whole secret society, that was, it was a fraternal society that was developed around the same time it came. They were active around the same time as the establishment of the Grand Lodge of England for Freemasonry. and there was a lot of crossover actually between the free gardeners and the Freemasons. They both used aprons. They the only difference was there was moral and symbolic instruction associated with gardening, as opposed to with building a building. So, but otherwise, very similar. And it could be argued for sure that many of the people who established the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 for Freemasonry they belonged to other organizations at the time too, including the Free Gardeners. There was also a group known as the Kabbalah Club that they belonged to. Many of the members belonged to, and they took all these ideas and they kind of, I would say they borrowed from different traditions in creating then what was to become known as Freemasonry. But yeah, Free Gardeners. That's what one of the. Yeah, go ahead.
And what I heard is that when the Freemasons built their buildings, it was the Free Gardeners who made the gardens afterwards.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. One of the things I look at from a Templar perspective is so many of these things came out of the Templars originally. I mean, there was we have to remember that the Templars were known for being these knights, but they also had stonemasons within their order. They had sea captains, they had farmers, and when the Templar order was suppressed, many of their ideas that they're bringing back from the Middle East and other places, it kind of had to go underground somewhat. And so it was very easy to hide their philosophy and their membership in stonemason guilds and in guilds of farmers and so on and so forth. So later on, it's not surprising that there was these new fraternities that were developed, passing on some of these same ideas and using some of the same symbolism and passing on these sacred ideas, Gnostic and Hermetic ideas, for example, that the Templars had been acquiring from the Middle East and other places, and then just putting them into new fraternal forms. And I think that's one reason why they're a lot alike, is because they were coming from the same source.
Yeah.
So the stonemason guilds became Freemasonry. The farmer guilds became things like the gardeners. So it just makes sense.
You mentioned Paracelsus here in the beginning, and you would have to think that the Free Gardeners probably knew something about spagyrics, right?
For sure. I mean, they used to plant gardens based on they recognized that different flowers, for example, opened at different times of the day, and they determined that those flowers must be ruled by astrologically by the planets, that were associated with that time of the day. And so you could they would plant a clock in the gardens where you could tell what time it was based on what flowers were opening. And it suggested that there was some sort of an energy that was tying those particular plants to opening at those specific times of day, and which hermetically were ruled by different planets. So we find
Have
that
you heard of?
even in alchemy today, like if I do an experiment with an herb, let's say ruled by the planet Venus, uh, I can digest that herb in a vessel where I you know I have collected the herb, I've ground it up, I've put it in the vessel, I've put in there like a water, for example, or even an alcohol, and put it at a low boil, and where it's just simmering. And you'll find that at the times that are ruled by that planet, uh, so like an herb ruled by Venus, for example, during the times that are ruled by Venus, that vessel will start to get much more active while it's bubbling and stuff than the rest of the time. Then when it passes that time, it'll start to go back to a simmer. But during the times that's ruled by Venus, it'll get active. And there's nothing in our modern science that could explain that, but it makes complete sense from an astrological standpoint in terms of the alchemy of it. And of course, on Fridays, that's the day ruled by Venus, and that's where it's really active. So, I think probably anyone who's looking into the alchemy of things and what herbs they were working with and what herbs they were planting, there's a lot more going on there.
Have you heard of moonflower?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a scary plant, but it blooms in like nice.
That's right.
The moon.
That's exactly right.
That's one example. That's a scary plant. I've heard people who ate it.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
like it.
You
They
have
go
to,
into
yeah,
delirium.
yeah, you have to know how to prepare it. I mean, every herb has its own, every plant has its own uh, uh, qualities to it. I mean, the opposite of that is like a sunflower, which follows the sun throughout the day. It's always facing the sun. You put it in a dark place, and it'll still, like a cave, it'll still follow the sun throughout the day. So it's picking up on something else.
I heard if you put can't exactly remember that they sometimes they also if the sun isn't out they start following each other instead, like the sunflowers. I've
Oh,
heard that.
maybe,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah, maybe,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe they all pick up on each other like a group consciousness.
yeah,
Maybe.
exactly. I don't know. Um, so I have a question about death. What
Yeah.
happens after we die, and is it the
What
same
happened?
for everybody?
I think everybody goes through a period of, after you die, you go through a period of reevaluation of your life. I think for anybody who's done astral projection, when you leave your body, you're able to experience things that are really happening, but it almost is like a dream state that you're experiencing it. And I think it's the same way when we die. When you die and you leave your body, you kind of enter into this consciousness field or plane, and it is kind of like dreamlike, I think. But during that time, you're given the opportunity to evaluate your life, and also to prepare for your next life in terms of what challenges that you want to have to face, that they'll help you with the things you need to learn or to become better at. Um, and I think we also choose our parents based on, amongst other things, their genetic uh, challenges. People people like to think of themselves as slaves to genes, but actually genes can be turned on or off based on our thoughts and how our thoughts
Epigenetics.
yeah, how they trigger our glands in our body to release different hormones to interact with our environment, and those hormones can actually turn on or off genes. So, sometimes we can be born with genetic challenges, but it's our own internal dialogue that's affecting whether we actually activate those genes or not. And so sometimes there's a lesson there, and we choose our parents specifically for that reason, I would say. But that's all part of the process of between being dead and in your next life of reincarnating.
So I mean, I did a video on near death experiences, and yeah, they have like a reliability rate of something like 95% of they're leaving their body and being able to recall what's happening in the room, who's operating on it, what they're saying, and everything. And there seems to like float out of their body, like across the roof, through the roof, and then sometimes some relatives meet you, sometimes a tunnel of light. And I do wonder if, because if you look at the Egyptian stories of the afterlife, you have, I believe, the weighing of the heart is first, and if you fail, you're the second death, as in hell in Christianity. But if your heart is as light as the feather, the cosmic order, you can proceed, but you have to go through trials like in the afterlife before you reach the is Elysian Fields, or is that no? That's Greek. It's called what's it called? The Egyptian underworld.
Yeah, you go through the duat.
Yeah, and then you enter the Egyptian heaven.
Right.
There's what's the name of it?
You have to go through Orion, the constellation of Orion, which was associated with Osiris.
Yeah. Oh, Aru. Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah, I was right. Yeah, the Aru. Interesting, but that the Egyptian afterlife so closely matches the Christian one, while the Sumerian one is more Greek, with Hades and It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, Christianity certainly borrowed a lot from a number of different traditions. So, yeah. And particularly the Egyptian, I would say.
Yeah. But if you look at the Sumerian and the Egyptian, they're very much alike when it comes to like you have Anu and Namu in the beginning, and in Egyptian you have Atum and Nun. I mean, it's almost the same names.
Right, that's right.
Seems to be a common origin. Like they share a common.
Absolutely. Well, there's also a lot of things within the Christianity which, I mean, like for example, the three wise men bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the baby Jesus. Well, the three wise men were probably representative of the three stars of Orion's belt, and which point to the place where the sun rises on the winter solstice, but gold, frankincense, and myrrh, those were the things that every pharaoh was buried with in ancient Egypt. So, those were the three treasures of the god Osiris, who is also associated with the constellation of Orion. So that's just one example of a carry on, but then also other things like the Lord's Prayer, for example, comes directly from the papyrus of Ani, which refers to the prayer to the god Amun. And it began, Amun, Amun, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. You know, the whole thing comes directly from the prayer to Amun. And of course, it ends with Amen, which is really just Amun. And the word Amun actually means the hidden one. And so we shouldn't be too surprising that when the disciples go to Jesus and they say, Jesus, how should we pray? He says, well, first of all, don't go to the holy places to be seen praying like a hypocrite, but instead go inside a secret place in your house where you can hide like a closet and give this prayer. And then he gives the prayer of Amun. So he's telling the disciples to become the hidden one, to become the Amun while they're giving their prayers. So there's a lot of things like that which are found, particularly in the New Testament, these Egyptian tie-overs from earlier Egyptian myth. And just like in the Old Testament, we find a lot of things that even though, Moses is said to be raised by Pharaoh in Pharaoh's court, many of the stories associated with the Old Testament actually tie in with a number of the Sumerian myths. So I think the Bible is borrowed largely from other earlier source texts. But which doesn't negate the truth of it. It just means it's been around a lot longer than people realize.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, even how do you say it? Melchizedek? Is that the
Melchizedek, yeah.
high
Melchizedek,
priest high
yeah,
priest
so,
of El Elyon, which
right.
according to the rabbis, they say El Elyon is an older name than Yahweh. It's
It is.
literally a different god he's praying to.
Yeah,
Than
it's actually the Phoenician name for God. It's where the word El comes from. It is for God in the Torah, but originally it comes from El Elyon, which just meant the first light.
the first light.
Yeah, so it's like God is the first light was really what it meant. But Melchizedek, even there's some interesting. Of course, he was the first initiator in the Bible, right? He initiated Abram, and then after he initiated him, Abram changed his name to Abraham, and so that's interesting. But the Apostle Paul said that Melchizedek was without father, without mother, eternal in the heavens. Well, what exists that doesn't have a mother or a father? It just exists. The answer, of course, is consciousness. So it implies that Melchizedek represents consciousness itself.
Could that be Poimandres?
Could be, yeah, for sure. Maybe.
What's interesting about El Elyon? I did a video. Just been researching these. If you look at the Sumerian statues or the carvings, they have bull horns on their caps.
Yeah.
And the symbol for Anu, he was associated with the bull. Same with
Right.
El Elyon.
Right. I think some of that had to do with the zodiacal age in which those came out of, which was during the age of Taurus. You tend to find the iconography within every religious tradition tied in with the zodiacal age in which it came out of. So you also find like Isis, Hathor, depicted with bull horns during the age of Taurus. There was a celebration of the bull in Egypt during the time of Taurus. And then, of course, during the age of Aries, that all changed to being about the ram. And so you had Moses depicted with ram horns, and you had Abraham actually sacrifices a ram at the end of the age of Aries. He ends up, instead of sacrificing his son, he sacrifices a ram, which just represented the end of the age of Aries. But even during the Aries time, this is when you find the god Amun being depicted as a ram, and you have the pharaohs with their crook and their flail, which of course are shepherding tools, and that was made during the age of the ram or Aries. So I think a lot of that iconography had to do with the zodiacal age in which it was coming out of, and certainly both the Egyptians and the Sumerians were very particular about following those zodiacal ages. In fact, you can't even go into a temple in Egypt without seeing the zodiac on the ceiling, pretty much in all the temples of ancient Egypt. So they were definitely tracking those processions, and it showed up in the iconography. Of course, it even shows up in the more modern times with Christianity, with Jesus and his disciples being fishermen during the age of Pisces, which just started at the same time that Christianity started. And of course, the Jesus fish became a symbol during that time. So it's I think all of that is tied to the zodiacal symbolism. In fact, if you go to the Avenue of the Sphinxes, which connects Luxor to Karnak in Egypt, by the time you get to Karnak, you'll find a series of sphinxes that have lion legs and a lion body, but they have ram heads. And it's because the reason why they did that is because the Egyptians were saying, look, our foundations of our civilization was back during the age of Leo, but these sphinxes are now being created during the age of Aries, which is why they have ram heads, but they have lion foundations. And they were very careful about mapping that type of thing symbolically.
I wonder because serpent symbolism, I mean, being Gnostic, it's pretty heavy on that.
Yeah.
I wonder, is that Scorpio?
The serpent symbolism, maybe they don't have a whole lot of, I mean, they do talk about one of the foundations of the Egyptian, one of the first Egyptian pharaohs was actually a scorpion, was under the scorpion, which would have been Scorpio coming out of Leo, the lion. So I think there's those definitely used in different capacities in the past, but the serpent itself, I mean, I think that ties in more just towards the the Kundalini energy that you find not only in the Eastern traditions, but you find that in the Egyptian traditions as well. And of course, certainly all you have to do is see the funerary mask of King Tut with the serpent coming out of the third eye. And that's really what it's alluding to. So, yeah.
And you also have the mouth of the snake is the feminine part, and the tail, and it's the Ouroboros eating itself. You have the alpha and the omega, and that's why a lot of like Atom, the creator god, is associated with the snake, of course, because it gets his skin.
Yeah, that's right. And the snake represented energy in itself. I mean, when you look at how a snake leaves its path on the ground, it's similar to the lightning bolt in the sky. And so it's, it was mapping the same idea. Though sometimes the serpent represented understanding of the physical reality, because a serpent, there's nothing that crawls closer to the earth than the serpent, right? So if you're wanting to understand earthly things, of course you're going to have a serpent, whereas heavenly things were depicted by birds. And so the uniting of the as above, so below, this course is going to be depicted as a serpent with wings, or a winged disc with over the temples of Egypt. You'll see the winged disc, but then you oftentimes see the serpent coming out of it as well. So it's uniting the above and the below, the heavens and the earth, and creating that as above, so below relationship. And you find that not only amongst the Egyptians, but you find it pretty much all over the world. I mean, that's really the origin of the dragon symbol. It's also in the Americas. You find like Quetzalcoatl, who was the winged serpent god, right? But again, it's uniting that above and below into one symbol.
Yeah, you have, from what I understand, because I did a video on it, Scorpio, the zodiac sign, has it's special because it has 4 different animals associated with it. I guess the first one is the serpent. Then you have the scorpion. Then you have the eagle, and finally the 4th one is the phoenix.
Yeah,
it's like that.
Yeah, different levels. Yeah, and some would say those are the different stages of the alchemical process as well. So
makes sense to me.
Yep.
So I'm not going to keep you much longer. I only have a single question actually left.
Sure, no problem.
Two, I guess. I got a bonus question as well. My friend, who's he's an English Freemason, a Master Mason, he wanted to know what you said that hermit comes from Hermes. What?
Right.
You never said why you think that.
Well, it's just, we know that's where the term comes from. Anytime you have herm in a word, it's related to Hermes. In fact, a pillar in ancient Greek there was a pillar that was known as a herm, and it was called that because it usually had a bust of Hermes on top of it, or something related to Hermes' philosophy. So, for example, in a Masonic lodge, they have these 2 pillars with globes on them, one with a celestial globe, one with a terrestrial globe. And they say, oh, these are the pillars of King Solomon's temple. But actually what those are is they're herms. They're in the Greek world, they would be a pillar with Hermes' philosophy on top of them. In this case, as above, so below, right? You have the celestial globe and the terrestrial globe. So that makes them Herms. So, yeah, anytime you have that Herm, it's somehow tied in with Hermes. Another one is the herb Harmala, for example, which is also known as Syrian rue, which we talked about earlier. It is tied in directly to, it's called Harmala because of the Herm, which had to do with Hermes, tied in with the sciences of Hermes. So, but hermit comes from that as well, or hermetically sealed, or there's all kinds of other terms. From a Templar standpoint, when looking particularly at the Grail legends and the Grail legend of Parzival by Wolfgang von Eschenbach, which was published in the 1200s, one of the main characters in Parzival is a hermit by the name of Trevisrent. Well, Trevisrent in Old German just means threefold knower. So if you have a hermit whose name is threefold knower, that makes him Hermes Trismegistus, right? The same guy who is associated with the Emerald Tablet of Hermes and who was deemed the creator of alchemy. So that's a little bit of the Hermetic arts, and it makes sense from the Grail legends. One of the things that takes place in them is you have this Fisher King, who receives a wound, and as he gets sick, the land becomes sick. And so the whole point of finding the Grail is to heal the Fisher King, which will then heal the land again. But it's suggesting an as within, so without relationship, or as above, so below relationship between the king and the land itself. So, and there are other alchemical metaphors all throughout that text. But so we shouldn't be surprised that one of the main characters that's helping Percival throughout the whole quest is Hermes Trismegistus, or Trevisrent the Hermit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, now that I think about it, it's interesting that it's called the Emerald Tablet, which of course is green, because if you think about the color spectrum, you have red on one side, one extreme, then you have blue, and then as the middle pillar, you have green, which is the point of balance. All of nature is green, and
that's right.
So on and so forth. So I wonder if that has any relation to why it's green, a green tablet.
I think symbolically, yes. There's also the reality that you can make there's a way of taking copper, and you can turn it into a copper oxide that can then be made into a copper acetate. And when it's made into a copper acetate, it looks like an emerald. It becomes green. It looks like an emerald. And from that copper acetate, you can actually extract copper monoatomic atoms, which are arguably one of the secret salts in the great work of alchemy. So, I think there's many layers of meaning going on there with that Emerald Tablet.
Yeah, isn't there a saying in the Bible is if the salt isn't good enough, add more salt? Like there's a saying about that.
Anytime the Bible talks about salt, a white stone, manna or bread, it's usually talking about the same thing alchemically.
Yeah, the Bible is definitely a alchemical and astrotheological text, and maybe a few
For
things
sure.
actually happened. I mean, the Old Testament is actually decently reliable, like for like the tracking stuff, like as an historical text, which is interesting. Like
Right.
it's more
Yeah, for
accurate in
sure.
some cases than Greek and like Roman. So you're like, what?
For sure.
But especially the story of Noah, you can clearly see that the Sumerian story it was like all the farm animals. Then in the
Yeah, that's
Bible it
right.
got changed to two of. That's just ridiculous. Like,
That's right. That's right. Which, I mean, from a, the Templar Order was originally founded largely because they were noticing that there were these flood myths that were the same all across the ancient world in different cultures. And these also corresponded with Plato's description of Atlantis, the civilization that also was destroyed in a flood. And it came to be reasoned that, well, there must be something to this then. And the Templar Order was created to go out and find evidence of this pre-flood civilization, which was whether it be the philosophies or artifacts or even technologies that may have existed from ancient time, and how they could be found and utilized, during the 1100s when the Templar Order was founded. And of course, a lot of those ideas are what led to the Renaissance of Europe. So, but it started with trying to trace down those flood myths and the cultures that may have survived the flood.
okay, I only have my bonus question.
Okay,
Do you have any favorite music? I'm guessing it's the Beach Boys, right?
it's not the Beach Boys. I'm more of a Doors type of guy. I like the Doors over the Beach Boys. So, yeah, but
I love the
I would,
Doors.
I would say my favorite band currently. I have a couple favorite bands currently. One is the band Gemini Syndrome, which has a
I don't
lot
know.
of hermetic and Gnostic ideas incorporated into their lyrics. So they're a favorite of mine. Uh, um, yeah, I'll just say that.
Great. So it's been a fantastic talk. Sorry, I interrupted you sometimes.
Oh, it's all good. Enjoy the conversation.
Um, so if people are interested in learning more about the Nice Thumper, can you recommend any resources?
Yeah, so I have a book called Way of the Templar, which explores some of the more, shall we say, esoteric ideas, Gnostic ideas associated with the Templars, both from a historical standpoint and in terms of doctrine. And I feel like I lay out pretty well the Gnostic connections, in particular with the Templars, not only with their founding but their mission in terms of what they were really up to. So that I would certainly recommend that for people who are interested in looking into Templar study. A great place to start that is through the Templar Collegia, which can be found at www.templarcollegia.org. You can inquire at that place to begin some Templar study of your own if you're interested.
And don't forget about the Sohor Ancient Histories new documentary, Secrets of the Knights Templar.
Oh yeah. So through Zohar, you can definitely find on YouTube. Secrets of the Knights Templar. It's a 5-part series for now. There's also on Gaia. I host Mysteries of the Knights Templar, which is a 10-part series, and all of that's new. A lot of new information coming out that hasn't been widely disseminated before, and it's because we're hoping to get that information out now. So very exciting stuff if you're interested in these mysteries and many of the things we've talked about today, actually, on this podcast. So
history in the making, like I said.
Yeah.
Anyways, Godspeed and thanks for the. We'll have to do it again sometime.
We'll do it. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I hope people get new stuff out of this particular interview, because I know we talked about a number of things I haven't talked about before, so it's exciting.